Welcome to today's event. My name's Weldon Dodd. I'm the SVP of Community at Kandji, and I'm excited to be with you today for our event about EDR and security on macOS. Now, if you've been a Mac admin for any amount of time, you may not associate malware and threats with macOS, but times are changing and the landscape is shifting, and it's more important than ever to understand the threats and the issues that face Mac admins today to secure their Apple fleets and be prepared for what the challenges are for today and how to mitigate those. With me today, I have several panelists. Patrick Wardle, the founder of the Objective-C Foundation, previously at NASA and the NSA, a longtime security practitioner who I think spends most of his time looking for zero-day vulnerabilities, but then sharing that information through his conferences and other writings and published books. I also have Ryan Donnan, the director of IT at First Round, which is a collection of startups and early stage companies. One of the beautiful things about First Round is the way that the community pulls together and shares information, and Ryan is an important part of making sure that things run smoothly across the entire org. We have David Patrick, the Director of Security and Compliance at Neural Payments. He's a senior network engineer and security practitioner with over 20 years of experience, previously in the government and finance sectors. So he brings an interesting perspective there as well. I also have Mario Laporte, who's the IT manager at Tensor IoT, over 13 years of experience in the IT industry with key expertise in Apple IT management. So he's run several large projects for companies like Blizzard and Cameo, deploying and managing enterprise-level solutions. So before we dive in today, I just want to take a moment for us to understand the threat landscape for macOS, where we've been and how we got here. So Patrick, if I could start with you, can you give us an overview of the current threat landscape with regard to Mac and how we got here?
Yeah, well then, first and foremost, thanks again for having me on this panel. Stoked to talk about Mac malware, as you mentioned, kind of my main jams for for better or worse. And it's interesting now, I think, to talk about trends because I've been really very involved in the Mac security space for now almost 10 years. Wow, getting up there. But you know, it's interesting over that time to see some new trends. And when I started, Mac malware was really not that common, and the threats out there were very basic, very amateur. In the last few years, though, we've really seen an uptick both in the prevalence of these threats, but also the sophistication. For example, this year we had the now rather infamous 3CX supply chain attack. And what was interesting of that attack was the fact that it had a macOS payload component. So a lot of supply chains are focused at Windows, but now the adversaries, the attackers, are realizing that Macs are very prevalent, very common, especially in the enterprise. And so we're seeing them kind of unfortunately take note of this and in their attacks adding Mac capabilities. Another great example is Lockbit ransomware, a very prolific ransomware group. This year we saw them building again, Mac-specific, Mac-compatible payloads, which is something new. And so, again, really to me, reiterates the fact that the hackers, the adversaries who are very opportunistic, are seeing Macs become very prevalent and thus are creating the prevalence and sophistication of their attacks, which is worrisome, but also I would say not unexpected, given again the new opportunities that Macs everywhere kind of offer the adversaries and malware authors.
Yeah. So Patrick, I heard a couple of terms that you mentioned there. I just want to make sure that we set the right baseline for our audience today. Malware, can you go into maybe just a quick description of what that means for the Mac?
Sure, and that's a great question because there's definitely some ambiguity there. To me, this is kind of an informal definition. It's just software that has malicious intent. So to me, I like that broad definition because it kind of includes, something like adware, which yes, the user might have clicked on the EULA that says, hey, we're going to show you ads and redirect your search engine results and download other payloads, which maybe legally allows the adware to do that because the user agreed to that. But that's clearly something that's unwanted, in my opinion, kind of malicious. Of course, it also then includes, backdoors, Trojans, viruses, code that self-propagates. But generally, to me, it's just something that is running on your computer that's not yours, that has ill intent. Again, as I mentioned, we're just seeing more and more of that. Adware is definitely bumping up because there's so much financial incentive. Ransomware that's targeting macOS, which is malware that's going to encrypt your files, right, and then demand a ransom. Backdoors, software that gives a remote adversary access into your computer or into the network. So those are kind of some of the more common terms, and we're definitely seeing increases in all of those, again, unfortunately.
Yeah. So one of the tools that's emerged over the last few years to combat this kind of malware in its various forms is EDR. And would you provide us with a quick overview of what distinguishes EDR from earlier attempts like antivirus?
Yeah, that's another great point because there's a lot of buzzwords that are sometimes thrown around, and understandably, people, users, customers, myself included, sometimes get confused. And it's important to understand that back in the day, antivirus was basically looking for static signatures, basically a sequence of bytes. This means when a virus came out, they would study it, look for kind of a unique sequence of bytes that they could then develop a static signature. And this worked great. There was not a lot of false positives, but it meant, well, two things. A, that the signature could only be developed after the fact, so it was very reactive. And at that point, it's like, okay, it's good to have it now, but proactive defense is obviously preferred. And also, if that virus changed itself, perhaps its code was polymorphic, or the malware authors just provided some update, the signature would no longer detect that. Luckily, over the years, we've now really evolved to more behavior-based detection, which I am a huge fan of. The tools I work with, again, that's really kind of the goal. And to me, the benefits of that is it gives you a mechanism for proactive detection. For example, ransomware is going to encrypt files rapidly. That's not something that normally happens on your system, especially by untrusted processes. So if you can build something, for example, in an EDR product that's looking for that malicious behavior versus, a specific sequence of bytes, you can have then a lot more of a proactive security solution, which may be able even to prevent brand new threats that have never been seen before.
Great, thank you. One other acronym maybe to define is ESF. Apple has invested a lot of technology, a lot of engineering work into providing the endpoint security framework. Can you just add a little bit about what that does and what it means for IT admins?
For sure. And, in the past, I've been a little critical of Apple sometimes in the sense that they didn't provide the APIs or the libraries to develop these third-party security tools. Well, endpoint security, or ES, really changed that. And I am such a fan of this because basically what Apple said is, we will provide you now with a subsystem, a framework, a set of APIs specifically designed for the creation of third-party security tools. And this framework, these APIs will be incredibly powerful and will empower you to build these heuristic-based, behavior-based tools that any modern security product should have. So, it provides a way to essentially get notifications about all sorts of activities on the system when a USB drive is plugged in, when a new process is spawned, when a file is written to. But more than that, it also provides the mechanism to authorize those events, which again, amazing that Apple exposes this functionality to us as third-party developers, especially writing third-party security tools. So now we can add more defense in depth. When a new process is spawned, if we've registered for that notification using the endpoint security framework, basically the operating system will come to us and say, hey, are you cool with allowing this process to run? So again, this is super empowering and allows us to develop very sophisticated, very advanced security tools that malware authors are definitely going to have to struggle to figure out ways around or bypass that now. So again, really, this is an opportunity to thank Apple for that. And if you're writing security tools, endpoint security is like the way to go without a doubt. So amazing all around.
Fantastic. Yeah, if folks here are not familiar, Patrick makes a number of security tools available on his own website, but we found the same thing to be true here at Kandji, right? As we were developing our security tools, being able to plug into that native framework, very performant,
amazing,
the right low-level access to file events that we need, but in a way that's secure and works with the rest of the system has been a really big advantage for us. So thank you, Patrick. I want to spend some time with the rest of the panel as well and bring some other people in here. So, Ryan, now that we have that sort of baseline, I want to maybe start with you. Again, welcome to our panel today. Thank you for being here. What have you been using before EDR to protect your fleet, and how have things changed for you?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. As you and Patrick both kind of hit on, people didn't really think of malware and macOS as going hand in hand for a long time. So, a dozen years ago or so, when I started, moving our org over to be, primarily just macOS, it wasn't a huge focus. So, as long as you had your computers on some type of MDM and they were locked down and you made sure they were encrypted, you kind of felt like you were doing enough then. But, over time, just saying, we're on Mac, there's no malware for Mac, that changed. So maybe, 6-7 years ago, if you wanted to do something best practice, like you needed to have an anti-malware tool. So we did start transitioning over to like early versions of EDR tools and implementing them. But I have found that it seems like macOS was always kind of a second thought to those large companies that had been building products for mostly Windows machines for a long, long time. So whether it was just the way that things were deployed, it was not efficient, or when Mac came out with their whole infrastructure change, it took months and months after that release just for a product to be released for that version of Mac, which obviously was not ideal when you had to tell your end users that you couldn't upgrade Mac OS, or you had to get a new machine that already had that version on and now you're unprotected until they came out. So it's really great to have something that is really Mac centric now. Since it still seems like Mac OS is kind of takes the backseat in a lot of enterprise security tools.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. To the rest of the panel here, David and Mario, thank you again for joining us. Would you say that there's been pressure for you to adopt EDR? What's been the driver in your organizations?
Well, thanks for having me on the panel. I'm happy to answer that question. The industry that I'm currently in, which is financial technology, there's significant compliance requirements, and specifically SOC and PCI. And those compliance requirements are not very declarative. They're not definitive. They're very vague, and in what they say, you need to have certain solutions, but it doesn't say what that solution is. You need to have antivirus. Well, that's pretty broad. And we're a company of predominantly software developers. So whatever tools that we use in place, it was important that we enable the agility of my team and not hinder them at all, but at the same time increasing our general security posture. As was previously mentioned, the trend in the industry that we've seen, where previously we could just say, it's an Apple device, there is no malware, that just isn't sufficient any longer, especially with some of the more recent events. Where the pressure has come for us is in our customers and our clients. Whereas in the past, they would ask broad questions like, do you use antivirus? That was usually sufficient. And because our company's only been around 4 years, initially, I joined the company when there's only 5 employees. Initially, we were just relying on the native Xprotect associated with Mac OS, and we just kind of broadly answer that question, yes. But now our customers, primarily because of recent security events, are asking very direct questions. They don't want us just to check off the box. They want to know specifics, like what are we doing, how are we doing it, and the native capabilities of macOS just weren't sufficient. It just didn't provide any centralized reporting. And so we definitely needed something to increase our security posture, but also to help fulfill and assuage our customers' concerns about our general endpoint protection. An EDR solution was essential to helping achieve our compliance requirements, but also help satisfy our customer requirements.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, right? I mean, both an auditor and a customer are asking for evidence and proof that you're securing your organization.
I totally agree with Dave. Over the past 2, 3, maybe 4 years, I found that the stakeholders that we work with have gotten much more advanced and educated when they're asking us questions. And like David alluded to, it's not okay to have mediocre answers to those. Like you have to have very good specifics and know what you're talking about if you want to work with certain groups of people.
Mario, what's your perspective here? What have been some of the benefits for your organization to adopt EDR?
Hi, thank you for having me, Weldon. Some of the benefits that came from integrating the EDR solution for our team is a lot like David himself with what he's experiencing. Our company is about 4 to 5 years old. We're still relatively new and we're in development. So a lot of what we do is based off of kind of going with what works and seeing what works with development. And a lot of times we have our users downloading packages from Git, downloading different libraries. And what was interesting to see when I came to this company, because historically in the past for the other companies I've worked with, there was a lot of pushback from our end users. There was a lot of like, why do we need to have this? What does it include? What is it tracking? Is there any data scraping? Does it sniff my traffic? So when I came to the company that I'm with now, Tensor IoT, it was less that and more, hey, why don't we have an antivirus? What are we doing to implement an antivirus? We want to stay safe because the realization that the world we live in, such as downloading those packages and libraries from Git, those aren't safe. Nothing's really safe in terms of data, how we implement things into our daily systems. So it was a huge ask from our end users to actually implement that. It is very nice to be in an EDR solution that it's relatively easier to explain away, like, this is how it works, these are the key features. So it was very nice being able to implement an EDR with a company that already expects that of us, right? They expect it of our IT group to already want to implement and have a security point for them to keep, not only their data safe, but their privacy safe, their location safe, not being attacked by phishing scams, all the crazy things that we see today. And we're 90% Mac and we're working on moving towards 100% Mac. We do still have some use cases where the justification is I need Windows because, and that's fine. We love both platforms, but the simplicity of how the Macs work and, across all different, EDR, MDMs, it's more seamless. So our goal is to make it 100% Mac, and it's a lot easier for our users to understand how everything works because it's so much easier to explain.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mario. Supporting developers is a interesting challenge, right? So I appreciate the work that you're doing there. I really appreciate the perspective that you brought here about the end user experience as part of EDR and what that means for your users. And so I wanted to pose that question to the rest of the panel here. Maybe we could go back to Ryan. How have you found the end user experience to be impacted by the adoption of EDR?
You need to have a product on someone's computer that will, I don't want to say protect them from themselves, but it is kind of that. You want to be able to ensure them that you have their back, even if they don't know it. And you want to make sure that there's zero friction on them. So it's super important that whatever product you choose is easily implemented and also has very little friction on their actual day-to-day work. Because I found if you stop people from doing something that they want to do or that they need to do, it's going to be very quick where they're going to find ways to work around you. So you have to work with your end users to make sure you find something that's mutually beneficial for everyone. So that really, you can check both boxes for, IT gets what they need and they can get their job done to actually, help build the company.
Yeah, thank you. David, I'll turn it over to you. What are some of the benefits to your users that you're looking for?
Well, as was mentioned, our company consists of approximately half developers and half business and sales and back-end support. And the developers were the portion of the company that I was most concerned about because ultimately, at the end of the day, they create our product. And if I inhibit them in any way, shape, or form, it's going to have a direct impact on the company. So I was definitely very concerned about that. So as we were piloting a couple different EDR solutions, that was one of my focuses is when this is deployed, are we going to have false positives, and is it going to consume excessive system resources? Because our developers already use a number of tools that are resource hogs, and the last thing I wanted to do was to compete with those the resources on their endpoints. So once we had piloted Kandji EDR and once we had deployed it to some of our test devices, those were not true dev endpoints, and so a couple of my developers volunteered to be pilots, and so we deployed it to them. And luckily, the initial deployments and those initial backend scans were seamless. They had very little impact to resource usage. Users, frankly, didn't even notice anything was running at all and had no complaints. The deployment was seamless, and I've had no complaints for any of my users at all, which was important for the general functionality of the company, but also the acceptance of the tool. As was just previously mentioned, people are really good at working around products, and specifically security products. So if there's not general broad acceptance and positive feelings towards a product, people are just going to bypass it one way or another. And thus far, the general feelings of our users are neutral, meaning that they have no feelings, which is exactly what I want. They haven't been impacted at all.
Yeah, amazing. I think that's a big trend for the entire industry, right? Is that the endpoint really is the focus of user productivity. That's where people do their work, is on an endpoint, and it needs to perform, it needs to run. Getting in the way of that really impacts the business. And so providing that great end user experience in a way that doesn't detract from the rest of their work has become essential to delivering, the promise of IT, which is to generate increases in productivity for the workforce. But in today's environment, you can't be productive without secure access to that endpoint and to other resources. So the two really go together. Patrick, I want to come back to you. We've been talking a bit about EDR, but it was also mentioned, how MDM was used previously to provide security settings, to lock down a few options on the Mac. How do you see MDM and EDR working together as we move forward?
This is an excellent question, and I'm laughing because this is something that I'm so jealous of, and I'll explain that in a second, is when you're using the endpoint security framework and a lot of security tooling, if you're not deploying it via MDM, the user has to jump through a myriad of hoops. So as David mentioned, and Ryan and others, right, it's like you're really not trying to impact the user experience. But unfortunately, the way macOS is designed to balance the power of security tools and user experience, if you are deploying security tools not through MDM, it's painful, both for the user, they're clicking lots of pop-ups, and for the developer, because you have to, display something to the user, handle their response, explain to them why. And so really, if you're developing security tools in the context of an MDM solution, that is, again, the no-brainer, and that's something really Apple is basically saying, like, this is the way. And we all know that, like, conforming to Apple's this is the way is generally a good idea. To go back to your specific question, though, Weldon, in the past you mentioned that MDMs were thought of as like, pushing out policy, setting, password lengths, patches and stuff, which is all good. And security tools were almost seen as like separate from that. But I really think we now have seen this intersection, this merging, this marriage of, hey, if you're going to be doing security stuff, especially via the endpoint security framework, which you should be, MDM is like your best friend. And so me developing kind of end users tools outside the context of the enterprise, I look, towards Kandji and others. I'm like, oh man, I'm so jealous, because via MDM, this would just solve so many issues in terms of secure deployment, user interaction issues, et cetera, et cetera. And so really, MDM and endpoint security is just like a pretty good match made in heaven. And Apple seems to be very cognizant of this as well. And if there are conflicts, they seem to be very open to making improvements as we see MDMs continually evolving in a way that's super beneficial to all of us. and continually, again, really trying to blend that user experience, or not break that user experience, with the importance of security, which many of the other panel members have really pointed out that is paramount. And I echo that 100%. Right? If you're negating or taking away, detracting from the user experience, that security tool is not going to last very long. Users are very wily, very creative. And so the goal is really to find a solution that doesn't impact the user experience. And for security tools, MDM is a big plus, a big friend there.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Yeah, you've touched on a few things that I think are really important. Just the way that the landscape is changing and the role of IT is changing. Security has to be a component of what every IT practitioner considers and needs to be part of their practice. But you also touched on some of the challenges with deployment. And when implementing a choice like this, that there's a few things that need to be done. And the MDM protocol, the framework that Apple provides, that is the mechanism to provide the entitlements that security tools need in order to get access to the disk, to read all the files, to be able to scan what's going on, look at other aspects of the system. And getting a really smooth implementation makes, as an IT admin, makes your life a lot better if you have a smooth rollout. So, David, if I could ask you, you chose Kandji EDR. How did that choice go, and what did it look like to implement EDR at First Round?
I'm glad you asked that, because when I was piloting and initially considering multiple different malware solutions, that was the biggest question on my mind, was the pros and cons associated with deploying it via or having an integrated MDM EDR solution or deploying a standalone solution. At the end of the day, our security team has a lot of projects going on simultaneously, and like everyone, we're balancing priorities. Well, getting something deployed effectively the first time and increasing our security posture and making it as seamless as possible to the users, those are our primary goals. And the more I looked into different deployment methodologies and what it would require to manage some standalone solutions and the resources that was going to consume on our team, the advantages of an MD solution integrated with MDM became clearly evident. The pilot process and the eventual deployment to our endpoints company-wide was seamless. As I mentioned previously, most of the users didn't even know it happened. My team is able to have one dashboard. We're able to view the general security posture and compliance of all of our endpoints in one place, and we're able to quickly review the threat and vulnerability status of all of our endpoints. And so those initial priorities have worked out very, very well by using Kandji.
Great. No, thank you so much. Mario, so David mentioned involving a few different teams across his company in order to implement EDR and to roll this out. It sounded like it went well for him. I'm curious about your experience. Did you see something similar where it required involving other teams to be successful?
When we were rolling out all of our testing, all of our beta testing through all the different EDRs that we were testing through that period, the main focus again was developers. I wanted to make sure developers were not affected by what we were testing. So I took 2 different small teams, about 3 or 4, and tested all these different variables to see, okay, what's it going to break? What's it going to take to fix it? And how do we implement this in a way that's not going to be intrusive to our developers' time? Because, we have to work through the bugs. We have to see what's going to come up because we don't know right away. A lot of that was, it really came to focus when we saw that the previous EDR we were using, that SSL certificate installed, did block them from utilizing a lot of different packages that they needed to grab. So with that, when we got to the EDR point, just like David said, it was so funny because when I wrote out the documentation of why we were moving from our previous EDR to the built-in EDR through Kandji, it was, okay, that sounds great. So we did a small test panel. We see how it worked with the devs. I said, hey, I'm going to remove this EDR from your system, and then we're going to launch the new EDR that's through Kandji. And I think I got 3 or 4 messages about an hour later. They said, hey, when is this going to finish? And I was, it's been done for about an hour. And they said, oh, so it's already running. I'm like, yes, it's so seamless the way it works. You don't see anything on your end. There's no user intervention that needs to happen. You guys don't have to click a 1,000 different things allowing different network proxies or different SSL certificates. It just works. And that's the beauty of why I really push to get the Kandji EDR into our ecosystem so that we can make that a seamless, transition across the whole entire spectrum of why we use the MDM from zero touch deployment. When we get a new employee, we know that initially when they get that laptop, they set it up, it's protected. It's in our MDM. We have all the features that we want for the policies written to that'll adhere to our third-party vendors' security policies and protocols, but also they're protected with the EDR now.
So Mario, you mentioned how quickly your pilot testing took, that it happened fast enough people didn't even notice, right? How long did the whole project take you from inception to rolling it out to the entire org?
So I think once it was brought to my attention that the EDR was available, I mentioned it to our leadership, and then we started working on getting into the early access. Once we were in the early access, I saw that, okay, this seems really viable, and I pitched it to our leadership, and they said, okay, cool. When it's available, let's go through with it. So once we got it, it seems funny to me now thinking back on it, but I think the documentation and explaining to our teams why we were moving away from our previous EDR up until implementation, I think that process took longer than the actual rollout itself of the Kandji EDR. So, I think we were at about a week to get that documentation written, get the teams explained why we're moving, the differences, what Kandji EDR does better. And from there, the bulk just goes quick, right? Like the EDR just does everything it needs to do. It adds the profile, and it was done, I think, within like 30 minutes. Like it was very quick. And when I got to show that process to our leadership, they were like, okay, yeah, we made a good choice, choosing the Kandji EDR because it does encompass everything.
Nice. Well, it's nice to hear that the rollout went so quickly, but I think you had some good advice there about communicating with the company, communicating with the users about what's coming and the changes that are involved so that people feel informed and feel comfortable with what's happening there. So I heard maybe a little bit in your voice about that time spent communicating, but it sounds like something that was really worthwhile and probably a good model for the rest of us to follow. Now, let's go ahead and fast forward a little bit. So Ryan, going back to you, how did it feel when you first rolled it out? What did you notice in your own team once you had EDR in place?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo what Mario and David said. It was just so simple to roll out the Kandji EDR that people didn't really notice anything, right? We went from trialing it and just having it in observe mode while our previous EDR application was still running to seeing that it was working well, that it was going to do everything we needed. It saw some things that our previous EDR didn't even catch. Luckily, it was just the adware stuff that isn't necessarily malicious, but no one wants. But when we saw that, and kind of had the proof of concept there, we switched off our old EDR and just kind of flipped the switch onto Protect for Kandji, and it was seamless. Like you really could not have been easier, and the fact that it's just two clicks of a button in your MDM already, just like it just made such a world of difference. Like I know Patrick said that it's really hard to deploy EDR without MDM. I would almost go so far as to say it's impossible. Like especially now, post COVID, where distributed workforces are common. You could do it, but it would be brutal to try to do any EDR without an MDM. And the Kandji EDR took it like a whole nother level of simplicity. So no one noticed a thing. Like I'm sure some people still don't even know that we're on Kandji EDR just because it was literally so frictionless to our end users. Couldn't have been easier, really.
Great. What was the response like from your leadership?
I get a lot of leeway from my leadership team to what I recommend, but with the knowledge that they're bought in on security as a priority and doing the right thing. So when I can say, there's this new tool that is going to be, just as good, if not better, of an EDR as what we're using. Plus, implementation is going to be easier. And I think, since it's built in with zero touch deployment, with, Apple, device enrollment, and just having Kandji on every device, no matter what, being able to say, like, this is another thing that, since it's built through MDM, is like, it's going to be on every machine always. And there's not going to be issues with Mac updates. There's not going to be issues with, oh, this one system extension didn't deploy on one machine, so now their EDR doesn't work. I just think all those things bucketed together made it a super easy sell, and obviously, a simple yes to make it seem like the right choice.
Yeah, great. Well, as we wrap up for today, I'd like to maybe just do one more round across the panel and ask, what advice do you have for Mac admins, particularly around security? Something maybe that you learned through your deployment, or something that's been on your mind to work on next. One thing you'd like to share with our audience today. So, Mario, can I start with you? What thoughts would you share with our audience here?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the greatest takeaways I think all of us here today in the panel can agree on is that the simplicity that Kandji offers across its MDM and EDR make it such a viable solution for any admin looking to implement this in their ecosystem. You have 4 panelists here that have incredible credentials and have just a mass of knowledge on what to bring into the security sector of this. So not having to, go through the hoops that, all of us went through in variable testing on different EDRs, different MDMs, what works, what doesn't work, what problems you may or may not run into, is really nice to have, people like us 4 say, we use this because it works. The simplicity of setting it up, guarantee you could probably set it up in a day.
Well, thank you, Mario. That's quite nice of you to say. David, how about you? What advice would you leave with our audience?
I would say the primary piece of advice is that a complex solution that never gets deployed is useless. And we always have competing projects, and if something is really challenging, it's going to get pushed aside and then may never get deployed. With Kandji, as others have mentioned, the amount of time for when we piloted it to get it fully deployed was 2 weeks at tops. And the amount of time I spent configuring it was very minimal. The primary deployment lessons learned is make sure you understand your user base and kind of break them up into primary need groups. So, developers have very different needs than the sales staff and so on and on and on. And so if you have to do some individual tweaks, you can do it separately for each for user group. And also just as you're doing your pilot program, make sure you have at least one user from each of those user groups as part of your pilot program, so that you can pick up any false positives and address any of those needs, so that your eventual full-scale deployment is as seamless as possible.
Great. Thank you, David. Ryan, your final thoughts.
Yeah, I would just say for Mac admins out there, whether your company is all Mac OS or you just have a small handful of users, and if you still ascribe to the thought that you don't need to worry about this type of stuff with Macs because they're Macs and they're not Windows machines, that's just not true anymore. So if you think you don't need an MDM solution on your machines, like, you do, so you should get one. If you think you don't need an EDR solution on those machines, you do, so you should get one. And I think if you make the smart decision, you're going to end up on Kandji just because of everything everyone else has said, the simplicity. But no matter kind of what someone chooses, just if you're still of the mindset that you're protected simply because it's a Mac OS machine, that's just simply not true anymore. And you need to kind of shift that mindset and start looking into these different solutions.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And Patrick, we'll wrap up with you. What advice do you have to share with our audience today?
Honestly, exactly what Ryan said. To me, that really hit the nail on the head, and what the others said as well. To kind of reiterate what Ryan said, maybe build a little bit on that. Gone are the days that a Mac is secure because it's a Mac. As I mentioned, I spent a lot of time looking at the latest threats, reverse engineering the malware, trying to kind of keep abreast of what the attackers are doing, and they're just continually evolving. So I think we've really obviously are far beyond, hey, Macs don't get malware, but more than that, the adversaries and the attacks are becoming incredibly sophisticated, successful, unfortunately, maybe almost to the point of parity with the Windows attacks and adversaries, and so yes, realize that using a Mac is no longer going to keep you secure. It's just you have to have additional security tooling in place. Defense in depth is just great best practice, and that really, especially now, applies to a macOS. And the adversaries are hoping we're not deploying MDMs with EDR components, because I know for a fact it's making their jobs a lot more difficult, especially if it's leveraging endpoint security. That's really a big obstacle for the adversaries, which is great. It's probably one of the strongest tools we have in our arsenal to kind of fight the good fight. And so kind of just, again, what Ryan said and the others said, if you're running Macs in the context of the enterprise, MDM solution with an EDR component, in my opinion, is really a no-brainer.
Yeah, I think that's sound advice, right? In all my years in IT, I've found that the list of things that I need to do and the things that I need to deliver for the organization doesn't seem to get shorter over time. And so tools that free up some time and make it easier for me to deliver value to the company that I'm working with are really valuable, because that allows me to focus on issues or improvements that will help the rest of the team and will deliver the promise of IT, having tools like Kandji that make that more straightforward, more direct, get to the result that I'm looking for. Hopefully is valuable for all of you, right? So I'd like to just take a moment here to thank our audience for attending. I hope that you found today's conversation interesting and enlightening, and you picked up some valuable insights that you'll be able to use. I'd like to extend a very special thanks to our panelists today, Mario Laporte, David Patrick, Ryan Donnan, and Patrick Wardle, for being with us. I really appreciate your time. Thank you again. Kandji EDR is enabling customers to consolidate their tools, right? And leveraging that single agent for endpoints on both MDM and security allows companies to confidently up-level their security posture. It's easy, it's smart. The team here at Kandji is ready to help make that process smooth and cost-effective, entirely seamless for you and your organization. If you're interested in learning more, please visit us at kandji.io/start. Thanks again for joining us today. We'll see you next time.